In today's video we're going to be going over the True Partiot gear set, the utility, the functions, a little bit of math, the backpack, the chest, and is it overall worth it? Welcome to Did You Know? Now True Partiot is actually a personal favourite of mine, simply just due to the fact of boom fireworks. However, it is kind of lackluster in pretty much everything else. Although this build does have some great utility in solo, it's not really that well thought out. However, in a team composition, it can be an absolute lifesaver for either more damage, taking less damage, or some rather interesting mechanics on healing. Now, before we dive in too far on a complete analysis of this gear set, let's actually look at what it does. Now, the 2-piece bonus is only a 30% increase in ammo capacity, and I say only for two reasons. One, 30%, two, ammo capacity. This really, one, isn't actually a lot. Two, ammo capacity. Really, this isn't your magazine size, okay, a fair one that's coming up, but it's just, it's dead. It means nothing. If you're in a group composition, probably one of you is running gunner, there's your ammo capacity. You get a refill of like every minute, so who cares? There's also plenty of ammo boxes around, so it's not like you really need this. It is just generally a wasted stat. Up next we have the 3-piece bonus, which is a 30% increase in magazine size. Again, this is pretty, I don't want to say terrible. It is more useful than the 30% increase in ammo, but it's still not that useful. Magazine size doesn't really actually give you anything, and what you think you can get from it, you're easily able to outperform in other areas of your build, such as increasing your burst DPS, your sustained DPS, reload speed. All of these things outperform just a 30% increase in magazine size. Point in case for this is the test that you can see me doing in the background. This is the build I'm running. It's just my standard DPS build. I've got a FAL on. Okay, I've got like 40 magazines in the mag, I think, 41 max. And we're just going to burn the head down. And we're going to calculate how long that actually took from start to finish. That was a grand total of 2.14 seconds. We're now just going to put my True Partiot build on, although it's now going to have more bullets in the magazine. And we're just going to run the test again. And yeah. Now, admittedly, accuracy, the amount of crits you're going to get are going to play a role in this. However, this one was 2.2 seconds. This is like a difference of 0.06. And it's not much to scoff at or even cry about. However, playing these side by side does allow us to see the difference, if only a small difference. Now, we can use DPS calculators, such as what I've got on screen now, to more accurately show the difference. The top build being the True Partiot and the bottom build being our standard DPS. This clearly shows that despite the fact that the True Partiot build, although not that far behind, essentially the increase in our magazine capacity has given us nothing, and we can exacerbate this point further just by showing their full DPS calculations. So the top one here is True Partiot. We've got the RPM, got a 52 round mag, reload of 2.3, optimal range 31. We've got our total mag damage, our burst, our sustain. The bottom one is our DPS build, same RPM. We've lost 12 rounds in the magazine. We do have a shorter reload, simply just because of the way the build works. Same optimal range, magazine damage. The burst is higher than True Partiot for both head and body. The same with sustained. The only way in which the True Partiot build is able to outperform is on total magazine damage. Problem is, due to the fact that the burst and sustain are higher, typically the magazine damage means nothing because the enemy you're going to be shooting is dead. So all the magazine capacity is actually giving us in this situation is just a complete net loss. 4-piece bonus, finally, I suppose. Right, this is a lot of text, fair warning. Red, white and blue. Enemies you shoot receive a stacking debuff of red, white or blue, and it changes every 2 seconds. Red amplifies the enemy's damage taken by 8%. White, hitting an enemy restores you or your allies' armor by 2% once every second. Blue, decrease enemies' damage dealt by 8%. Full flag, enemies that die while under the effect of all 3 debuffs create a 5-meter explosion, dealing damage equal to their total health and armor. Explosion strength is reduced on named enemies. So, up first is red. Amplifies the damage enemies take by 8%. This is basically just a straight up amplifier on your damage by 8%. It's quite small. It's not really meaning much. However, the reason it potentially could be quite large is it's going to amplify all damage they take. So typically if you're running something like Perfect Glass Cannon, that amplifies your damage by 30%. Just your damage. However, if you now have 4 people shooting the same target, it is equivalent to about 32% amplification, as everyone dealing damage to it is going to get that 8% multiplicative damage. This is very worthwhile when dealing with named or chungers, etc, etc. However, like I said, for single player, this set isn't that worthwhile. For multiplayer, this set can be a lifesaver because it applies to everyone and everything. The white buff. Shooting at an enemy restores you or your allies' armor by 2% every second. This means as long as the True Patriot player procs the white buff on an enemy, shooting that enemy will restore your armor. Or if an ally shoots the enemy who has the white buff applied, it will restore their armor. It's only 2% over 1 second, which means in order to get a good amount of healing out of it, you will need to continually fire. It's not typically worthwhile on just your normal red or purples. However, for elites on heroic, it can be worthwhile, garnering up to a 4% heal, which is meh. Named elites or chungers. It is typically worthwhile though, mostly on raid bosses if you have someone who is willing to play the True Patriot build. One thing to note is proccing the heal from the white buff if the True Patriot player is wearing an emphatic resolve chest will proc that talent for your allies as well as yourself. This typically is only really beneficial if you are running a 6 skill tier build, however it does allow for some decent variety in building with this set. Then finally the blue buff. This decreases the amount of damage that enemies deal by 8%. This is multiplicative, however it's really not that much. Considering it's very difficult to actually calculate how much damage enemies do, and it changes per faction, per type of enemy. Rushers tend to do more damage than standard enemies. Grenades, snipers tend to do a lot more than pretty much everything else. Chungers, damage wise, are actually the weakest, but then they also stay alive the longest. So an easy way to say it is, quite simply, if they do 100 damage, you take 8% off of it, 92. If they do 1000 damage, you take 8% off of it, 920. It really is just that simple. And for the final bit, we have full flag. Enemies that die under the effect of all 3 debuffs create a 5-meter explosion, dealing damage equal to their total health and armor. Explosion strength is reduced on named enemy deaths. This is worded very poorly. I've actually done an entire video just covering this. However, point to note, it is your total armor and health. Just yours. Not the enemies. That would be ridiculous because then things would start blowing up for like 19 to 20 million damage all over the shop. It's your armor. There are a few other things that can influence the amount of damage that the explosion will do, such as glass cannon, as that increase amplifies all damage you do by 25 or 30% for the perfect glass cannon. So that basically covers off the majority, or basically everything really, that True Patriot is capable of, and that's taken far longer than I would have anticipated, simply just because a lot of people put stock in the wrong things. Now, like I've been saying throughout basically, and tried to hint at continually, in solo this build isn't worth much. However, in group play, it can be the difference between a successful clear and a complete fail. This is more geared towards the casual players though. You very rarely find True Partiot in the speedrunning or like upper tiers of play style, simply just because it's not needed. The only part of True Partiot that you could argue would be needed would be the amount that it decreases enemy damage done to the players. That's basically it. The explosion is basically null and void. It very rarely, or if ever, actually catches anything in the explosion. The healing is absolutely nothing to write home about, and the increase in overall damage, although is handy, most players, if they're running in those sorts of circles, do enough damage by themselves anyway. We then have the chest and backpack talents, the chest being waving the flag, which increases the red, white and blue rotation speed to 1.5, where the backpack is patriotic boost, which increases the red, white and blue debuff strengths, taking the red from 8 to 12%, white from 2 to 3% and blue from 8 to 12%. Now, the chest is mostly, is useless. I can see a few people using it, maybe. However, the kicker here, depending on how you want to play, is actually going to be the backpack. There are some interesting styled builds that you can utilize with the backpack that's focused deeply on just pure support. They're not there for DPS or tanking, they're there mostly as a heal. These are typically 6 yellow styled builds, and they can be of use. I actually have a True Partiot heal tank which I will use in Legendary, and it does absolutely fine. However, the utilization of these is minimal at best. Now, the next part, since we've just spoken about using it on a healer build, is using True Partiot as a skill build. This can be beneficial and it does work. However, there is one important thing to note. You cannot proc the debuffs or the buffs, or however you want to look at them, by use of skills. You have to shoot them in order to actually give them a flag, red, white or blue. However, once they have these debuffs, they are then applied. The only one that has a negative or unhelpful effect on skills is the white buff. Shooting or hitting a white debuffed enemy, which would normally heal you, with a skill doesn't heal you. However, if you have the red debuff on them, you will do 8% amplified damage, even if it is your skills. Those on blue debuff that will do 8% less damage will still hit your skills for 8% less. But these cannot be applied by use of skills. The same is also true of Pestilence. The tick itself will not apply the flag. Enemies with the red flag will take 8% amplified damage increase from the Pestilence debuff. The Pestilence debuff hitting a white flagged enemy will not heal you, and there's no point even mentioning the blue, because the blue's not actually going to do anything in terms of Pestilence. So there are some interesting interactions. It can be very worthwhile running this as a team. In a solo, I really wouldn't actually recommend it. However, it is useful, and it does, or did at the very least, have a few niche roles in certain aspects of the endgame community. However, as of late, it seems to have fallen short simply just due to things like Sledgehammer being able to be readily applied, and is obviously a lot more damage than what True Partiot would give. Now, I sadly only have 2 True Partiot builds. This is the one I'm running in the footage you can see behind me. Just basically a standard DPS build, but with True Partiot. I use the FAL due to the fact that it is a slower fire rate, so this allows me for greater ammo economy while trying to proc all of the buffs in a single magazine. That is it. I would recommend something more along the lines of a Carbine 7 if you feel the need. For my second build, it is the True Partiot tank build I suggested earlier. The talent on the chest should be emphatic resolve, but I'm a dum-dum. I'm using Catharsis for the mask for a little bit of tankiness and self-healing. I'm using the Bulwark shield and the Restorer chem thing, the healing chem. This allows me to tank legendary enemies while healing, as well as proccing the buffs and debuffs of True Partiot to maximum effect, since I'm using the backpack, which allows for greater healing, greater damage for allies, as well as the fact that it reduces the damage that the legendary enemies will be doing against myself as well as my team. This is a very, very niche build, and I wouldn't recommend to anyone really playing a lot more casually. Anyway, that is just about it for this video. I do hope this has been helpful. Have fun, good luck, and don't die. It's bad for the health.